Welcome. This is the podcast series dedicated to living a revenue culture. And this one, we're in a transition time right now because the revenue game who's done this podcast for the last 3 years is now being acquired and becoming part of TTI Success Insights. So you're going to see over the next few months a transition where not only will we talk about revenue science and not only will we talk about how you apply revenue science to create a revenue culture, but we're also going to bring what TTI calls human centric business into these, because the whole idea of living a revenue culture is you maximize profits only after you've optimized people. So we're going to tie those two things together, and we'll continue to bring you people like Coleman, who's here with us today, who's out there in the real world doing this stuff and is going to bring us some things that maybe some of us haven't been thinking about. So our guest today is Coleman Caldwell, and we met about 6 months ago. And I think ever since then, I've been trying to figure out how I get to work with him. We haven't quite nailed that down yet, but we're going to continue to try and figure that out. He's been in the sales business for 40 years approximately, and he's been on the B2B side, the B2C side, the big company side. He's had a lot of really interesting experiences and very successful in all of those. And as he and I talked a few weeks ago, this is why I got so committed to having him here, is I was explaining the world of TTI, where we're helping people transform their businesses with a thing we call next points. And I was explaining that, well, we've kind of designed it this way. And he says, well, if this was a factory, you wouldn't be talking about people, you'd be talking about machines. And in machines, you'd be talking about depreciating them. And in the TTI world, you're talking about helping people appreciate every year. Well, that had me hooked. I had to have him on the show. And then I learned he's got a superpower, and we'll have him talk about the superpower in a few minutes. But that superpower is really the whole idea of a servant leader kind of sales leader. And that's one many people don't think about. They don't think about salespeople as servant leaders, but you're going to hear about it today that's real. So welcome, Coleman. I'm glad to have you here.
Rick, it's nice to join you today. Thank you for the nice introduction. I appreciate that.
Well, the one thing I forgot in that introduction that we can't get past is currently he gets to sell chocolate. He works for 72 Chocolate, and he may be the guy that hands out the here's the test chocolate for you. So I can't imagine a better job than selling chocolate, but I'm gonna let Coleman give you his background and explain some of the places you've been, some of the things you've done, and what it's like to sell chocolate.
Yeah, well, my family and friends will tell you that my true superpower is being able to provide them chocolate samples. Now, my wife told me it's the best job I've ever had. So it's been a lot of fun. It's with a group of folks out in northeastern Ohio, which is where I'm from, and it's wonderful. It's a really great company. We're growing, and it's you talk about my background. I started off, hard to believe it was 40 years ago, with a fairly small company in northeastern Ohio, and through a lot of hard work over a number of years, we grew that to be a pretty significant business, a pretty significant brand in the consumer products world. And as I'm starting to write one of my last chapters, coming into 72 Chocolate, it has a lot of the same underpinnings and earmarks to what I started doing 40 years ago. So my first chapter hopefully is going to be very, very similar to my last, or one of my last chapters. So as you said, I've had a number of sales and leadership positions in a number of different companies, most all of them in the consumer product side, food, which I'm in now and I've been in the past, as well as hardline and housewares and education products. But always the biggest boss we all had was the consumer.
Yeah.
And so I've got a pretty good idea of how we get things done by fact-based selling tied to consumer insights and things like that has been a big part of my career.
Well, help us understand, servant leadership is one of those things people frequently talk about, particularly from the stage. And, they talk about how important it is, or they write a book about it. And yet I don't think most people apply it in the sales part of the business. I think they think about it as kind of a strategic umbrella over the organization. But you get to apply it in actually creating revenue and building teams and having an impact out in the market. Share what you mean by servant leadership, and then how you've actually applied it in real life.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So first of all, I wouldn't have been able to take the principles of servant leadership, and I'm going to get into a little bit of the extra framework. And one of the things that I borrowed along the way to help build that, unless it wasn't a very conscious decision by all the senior leaders of the organizations I've been with, if I believe it would not have been nearly as successful if I'd done it in a silo of just sales or just sales and marketing. There's been operational alignment. There's been financial alignment. All those things have all come together to support what the servant leadership type of approach that I've tried to do. And I would be very candid with you. It's very difficult. It's not, oh, servant leadership, that sounds fun. Let's do that for a couple of weeks and see if it works. I mean, it's a commitment to, turning an organization upside down, whether it's the entire organization or it's a functional leadership is going to work every day for your colleagues and being responsive to what they need so they can in turn be responsive to our customers. In my world, customers meant people like Target and Walmart and Kroger and Home Depot and Lowe's and the like. So they can be responsive to those customers who in turn can be responsive to our consumers. We've all been in organizations, and I've been in them as well. And someone that might have worked for me in the past might say that I didn't do a very good job of it sometimes, where organizations are responsive, working their way up versus working their way down. So, colleagues are responsive to the leadership, where it really, in successful organizations, I believe it's the leaders are responsive to the colleagues, to their workforce, to their teams and other teams, cross-pollination and collaboration to get things done.
Yeah, it's interesting as you say the kind of the cross collaboration. One of the things we often talk about on this podcast is cross silo, either cooperation or conflict.
Yeah.
And when you think about the servant leadership, how does that impact kind of cross silo KPIs and people wanting to build kingdoms and those kinds of things?
Yeah. It's a great question. I would say the servant leadership model or tenets of putting employees first is contagious. That if in one organization I was in, we started to do it within the sales and marketing silo that I was responsible for. And the first couple of folks that came over to me were the operations people. There's always that very natural friction, collective friction, positive friction between ops and sales, right? I can sell more than you can make, and how come you can't sell what I made? Very, very common conversation. But the ops team we sat down and they said, what are you doing over here? We see people that are coming in earlier, they're staying later sometimes when they need. They're much more in tune with the consumer. Our forecasting is getting better because they're closer to the customer. What are you doing? And it was really a part of an underpinnings that I mentioned before, the servant leadership model called a performance organization. And they go hand in hand. And a performance organization really has 4 or 5 key things to it. One is customer focus, both internal and external customer, or consumer focus, depending on the business, if it's B2B or B2C. It's key measures and accountabilities. Again, making sure, and they're measurable things. They're not touchy-feely, soft things. They're very concrete, measurable, whether they be daily, monthly, quarterly, annually. There's communication, both upstream and downstream, and candid communication. Candid communication is a phenomenal weapon in an organization. that's not used enough, and it's tough. Uh, the other couple are rewards and recognition, which is the toughest one to get done and the one that people tend to ignore. And then the last one is continuous development, training, and ongoing learning for the organization and for the individuals in it. So we started to do that in the sales organization. They've never had bonus programs. They've never had any kind of sales reporting that could monitor and track KPIs. And so we put these things in place. I didn't do it alone. I had some help from IT, which they were awesome. But we had these tools and people could start to say, hey, did I have a good day? Did I have a bad day? What kind of things can we do better? Hey, we won. Why did we win? Just as importantly, when we lost, sort of do a post-mortem. Why did we lose? And it got across the organization, and folks started to come in and helped us break down silos because we could be better internal customers to the ops people. We could provide better finance and cash flow to finance. It was just a byproduct of it. It wasn't what we intended to do. I was flattered and thought it was fantastic when some of my other colleagues in some of those other silos said, hey, what are you doing over here? This is working better than it has in the past. And we just built from there. But it was the underpinnings of that performance organization is when you share with folks what they're accountable for and you give them tools to measure it, you're not taking tests anymore that people don't know they're being tested on. It's very black and white. When you have very candid communication on performance and lack thereof, and you ask, some of the most powerful things you can do is ask people questions. Not only, people think about asking questions as a sales thing. I would submit to you, Rick, that it's a leadership skill that's vastly underutilized. One of the most powerful things I saw happen, not only when I was coming up and I had wonderful mentors along the way, but also with teams that I've been responsible for, is you stop and ask, so what do you think we should do? People are very used to, unfortunately, being told what to do, not asked what they think they should be doing or how to do it, and gathering that information. And then the most important question, even beyond that one, is when they give you the answer, is ask them, and what else? Because that's where the real gold is they'll give you the first part of the answer, but then you can say, so what else do we think we should be doing? How else would you solve it? How would you execute that? What else can you tell me about that? And it's okay to pause. It's okay to have, several seconds of silence because you want people to be reflective and think about it. But, those are the kind of things that I see as an outcropping of servant leadership, performance organization. I think they go hand in hand.
Well, I'm guessing that not just the asking the question is important, it's the fact you're listening.
Yes.
And when you asked the second question, you proved you were listening because most people are reluctant, and tell me if this fits your background, but I'd expect if you were my boss and you asked me that question, I'd answer it, but I'd be a little concerned that I got to answer it in the right way so that I'm, giving what my boss wants. But when you ask that second question, you almost force me into telling you the whole truth instead of just part of it. Is that?
Early on, that's exactly some of the reasons why you do that, is to get them comfortable with giving you more details than they felt they could just give you the minimum and get the heck out of there, because I don't want to be accountable for what I just told you. Over time, though, it's, I've had teams come into me and say, we're going down a terrible path here, and here's why. And, very candid. Much, sometimes we agreed not to agree, we agreed to disagree, but I never had issue with someone that spoke the truth. It wasn't, it's the old saying is you praise in public and you discipline in private. I mean, I didn't want to be called out in a meeting of 20 people and told I was crazy. But I really respected someone that could come in and say, hey, we're really struggling here and we need your help on something. Again, that to me was a sign that we somewhat turned the organization around to where I wanted to be responsive to my team versus they were just feeding me information. Because that's no fun. That's no fun. I learned a long time ago, I'm far from the smartest guy in the room. And I like to make decisions collaboratively and learn things along the way.
when you encourage them to come back to you with their best view of what's really going on, my guess is that avoids a whole lot of future landmines.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And when you have other functions that are in the same mode, operations wise, finance wise, et cetera, you get much better information up, throughout the organization and much better idea sharing. Our problems in my function of sales and marketing over my career always had to have a component of other collaboration and other insights from around the organization. Uh, whether it comes to pricing, whether it comes to inventory flow, whether it comes to new product launches, we didn't control all the information, but we needed to coordinate and collaborate with all that to meet our end users or the customer's expectations.
Yeah, when you would go into an organization and you'd start to live that, because my sense is servant leadership isn't something you pretend to do. It's something you believe in and you actually live it. When you would start to live it, did you have people in the sales organization who were having trouble believing it?
Sure. Some of them were pretty candid, and some just sort of sat by the sidelines to see if I would be sustainable and consistent with it. What I found that the folks that I aspired to lead like and that I call mentors to this day were extremely authentic. They were extremely consistent, and you always knew where you stood with them, and you didn't have to mince words as long as you were respectful in conversations. And that's what I tried to do. And some days I was better at it than others. You're right. Servant leadership isn't something I'm going to wake up tomorrow and say, hey, let's try this for a while. It's got to be something you work on every day. And just like that continuous improvement in the performance organization, servant leadership isn't set it and forget it. You're always fine tuning. You're always working on it. You're always refining your communication to be more exact, more candid, more specific. You're working on your KPIs collaboratively with people. And sometimes the key performance indicators change based on what's going on outside of our four walls in a company.
Yeah, this is going to be a question we hadn't talked about earlier. As I'm listening, I'm imagining that if I were in your sales organization and I was experiencing the combination of the performance organization and servant leadership, I would probably be a different person 2 years from now. And when I go on in my career, I'd probably be looking for a place or a job where those same things could be brought in. Have you tracked some of the people that have worked for you over the years to see where they went and if they, continued to apply this and, knew how to become evangelists of it themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll answer it in a couple different ways. Yes, I have kept in touch with a wide swath of people over my career, dating back 30 plus, 35 years plus. A large number of them have gone on to be vice president of sales, executive vice presidents, presidents of organizations. I don't know if it was because of me. I'd like to think I might have had some influence to it. They were pretty high performance, stellar folks to begin with. If I gave them some building blocks that they could then extrapolate and make even bigger and put their own top spin on their communication style and being authentic, that'd be great. I'd be flattered to hear that I had something to do with that. The other thing you touch upon though is tracking and keeping in touch and seeing how people. That's the one thing that I've learned as far as my continuous development, right? Because if you take that performance organization, you got to internalize that on communication style, on customer focus, but also the one that's really very personal, which is continuous development and education of the individual, is that I've learned so much more by building my network. Folks like yourself, Rick, you and I met 6 months ago. We had one conversation that have led to many more.
Yep.
It's keeping in touch with folks that you really enjoyed working with, you had a personal connection to, and continuing to learn from them and see their development and what they're doing. And once in a while, they tap you on the shoulder to say, "Hey, I'm having a tough time. What do you think we ought to do here?" Or here's a crossroads I'm at in my career. What questions am I not asking somebody that I probably would give me a clearer picture? That's very flattering when people reach out. And it happens from time to time. Reach out and want to reconnect and make a connection there.
But it's interesting, early in the career, when you have people who get to experience an organization who lives the servant leadership and the performance organization kind of principles, even though you might not be the only impact, you're at least somebody that's doing it and they're watching it work. And it gives people the power to be confident to take it forward, because once they see it work in an organization and they see ops come and talk about what should we do next, and finances part of the conversation, and it's not isolated, me over you kind of management style, it makes it easier for them to want to go forward and do it because they know it works.
Yeah. They've been part of an environment where they had fun. In a lot of cases, we had good employee retention. We had some turnover. Some of it we decided to make on our own because they just couldn't get up to speed on the performance expectations, unfortunately. But that said and done, we created an environment of a performance culture. They all go hand in hand: performance culture, servant leadership, performance organization. They're all a cultural type of thing. And some cultures can be very toxic and bad. And these are the tools to make the culture worthwhile and sustainable, and the benefits that are derived from that.
Well, and it's interesting. The whole purpose of this podcast is to help people recognize that a real revenue culture is not one where you're exerting power to make people do what they're supposed to. That until you optimize the people and you get their creativity and their innovation and their collaboration and their passion into it, you're never going to maximize the profit. And it sounds like you've lived in that environment where you've believed those things, and the whole servant leadership and performance management are enabling people to make that happen.
I completely agree with that statement. Yeah.
One of the things that
we always had performance targets. They weren't easy. They were stretch goals, but we got there together. And the best organization, one of the best organizations I've been in, was the entire rewards and recognition program was across the organization. I mean, finance team, the operations team, the IT folks, the marketing team, the product development team, the sales team. We all had 5 or 6 very measurable goals that were all intertwined.
Yes.
Whether it be a new product launch. So it wasn't, those sales guys get bonuses and get to go on president's trips. Everybody won. And they were our top 5 or 6 objectives for the entire organization. And that's when the financial thing really, the flywheel really started to build, was when you had everybody aligned. Now I had 4 or 5 other individual goals by people, by each person or by department. And so did the other organizations, on cash flow or inventory turns, things like that are very important metrics. There were 4 or 5 very top line goals that were driven on profit maximization, revenue maximization, and customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction that everybody owned and everybody was rewarded on, and it was reported on quarterly. It was pretty powerful. It was hard. It was hard. It took weeks and months to get those all aligned. It wasn't like everybody just submitted them and you shook them all up and go, oh, we're all done. It took a little bit of time to get them to where everybody said, now, are these measurable and are these important?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear. You probably just did the best description of what we talk about is you can have a strategy and you can tell people go execute. But if you don't build that, we call it a deployable structure of all those things that you just mentioned that are across the organization that allow the people executing to have the tools, to have the resources, to have the empowerment, to have the messaging, to actually go out and execute well. You know, I don't care how talented you are, if all those things you just talked about aren't in place, you're never going to get any place near your maximum outcome.
You know, as you said that, it reminded me of something, a good friend of mine, again, we worked together 30 years ago. He rose to be CEO of the company that we worked for together. I still keep in touch with him. We're one day after a meeting about going through a lot of cultural change, a lot of change we had to make, uh, financial goals we had to hit, and the organization wasn't ready for it. And he said, it dawned on him, and he said it, I've never forgotten. He said, we have to outpace our training and our education in our people before we're going to expect them to be able to accomplish what you just said. What we wanted to execute is got to be, you know, we should have done this 6 months ago with our people to get them ready for this change that we're going to ask them to make next week. And it was a great insight, is that training development is must outpace any change you're going to make in an organization to be successful. You can make the change, and then in 6 months you're going to change it again, or you're going to call it a failure. And a lot of that can probably go back to the organization just wasn't ready for it. They weren't
Yeah.
prepared for it, and they didn't have the tools to make the tough challenges and choices they had to make to be successful.
You know, and that's and you and I've talked about this before, but it's one of the things that when I look at other parts of business, you know, and I came out of manufacturing world, when we would be building a new factory, we wouldn't, we'd never just throw all that stuff in there and tell them you're supposed to produce, you know, build cars 72 an hour. We'd have everything prototyped, and we'd done test runs and quality control checks and process management and train. And
Yeah.
then, you know, we'd have a high probability of outcome. But with people, we tend to not do any of those things. We just throw them all in the building and say 72 an hour, go do that.
Yeah.
And it cracks me up that after all these years, we haven't learned. So,
Yeah.
well, so one of the terms you've used, and we've talked about it, and it's the part of the theme of the podcast, is culture. And it sounds like the work you've been doing historically, I mean, every business gets the culture they created. And it sounds like when you create a culture, you're doing it intentionally. Is that a true statement?
Absolutely. Yes. Uh, it's sometimes it's not taking as long. Other times it's been a work in process. But the end goal has always been in mind, is to be as responsive as I could be to the people I had responsibility for, and then in turn pushing decisions downstream, giving them the tools to be successful, and investing in their development.
And one of the things that's interesting to me is people always um, lament the fact they didn't do a good job preparing a succession plan. You know, when somebody gets promoted or they retire or they leave, then they scramble for, well, who's going to fill that gap? It sounds like the model you're talking about almost naturally prepares somebody for the next level up or the next job over. Is that a good observation?
Yeah, that's very fair. I think a couple things from that I think about, Rick, are one, the stronger the culture, the less surprises you have in unplanned turnover. So they do happen, right? And a gentleman I used to work with, he kept a list of 3 or 4 people always in the bullpen, as he called it. So he was always prepared, but we had a pretty good culture, so he didn't have to go to that bullpen very often. But again, a solid, sustainably strong culture of employee engagement, colleague engagement. You're not going to have these, oh my gosh, I have a hole here I didn't expect, as often as in a culture where you have rampant turnover. The other thing that comes to mind is if the organization's really fine-tuned, you probably have a couple people that can take that stretch assignment,
Yeah.
not just one. It's not just, well, okay, it's Pete. Pete's the guy. It
Yep.
can be Pete and Jane and Sue and John, are all ready for it in a variety of different ways. And then depending on where you are in the leadership role, if that person's going to be on your team, you've worked with them so you know where their strengths and weaknesses are, so you can put them in that stretch goals, put them in that new role and responsibility, and be able to provide the direction to them, provide the responsiveness to them on what they're going to need to be successful. Because you're not bringing in from the outside, and people bringing in from the outside is fine. That's how I've been the guy that was brought in from the outside. So I'm very proud that I've never gone into an organization in a leadership role and said, well, it's time to clean house and bring in folks that I knew from my past lives. I've by and large, we've been able to do it with all the same folks that were there long before I came into the role.
Now, we always have fun doing these, and I don't want to run out of time before we talk about questions. And you and I have talked about both questions as a selling process, and then we talked a little earlier about questioning as part of leadership. Is there a discipline to that? Is there a science to that? Is it teachable, trainable, or is it intuitive? And what do you want to tell people about that? Because I think it's been part of your career.
I'd say yes to all those things. It's intuitive because you're naturally curious. I've found that the best sales professionals I've ever worked with, the number one thing that made them top notch were 2 things, really. One was they were always curious, meaning they're questioning, they're asking what if, they're asking what's keeping you up at night, they're asking tough questions where I don't know if I want that answer, but they're going to ask the question anyway. And so that's some of us are born inquisitive, and some they just need to make it a core competency to say, I just got to keep asking questions. I'm a big proponent of question-based selling, just like I am of question-based leadership. Preparing questions, funneling down that sales funnel. It's the same thing for a questioning cycle with a prospect or a customer or a current customer. It's all for new business, question-based selling. It's preparing it, writing the questions down.
Yeah.
Don't wait it. I've been doing this a long, long time, and if I don't write the questions down, invariably I'll walk out of a meeting and go, oh my gosh, there's 2 things I forgot to ask. And I've got thousands of hours of doing this, but I still write down the questions. As I wrote down stuff in preparation for today just to help me organize my thoughts. The other thing that I think is not talked about when it comes to question-based leadership, question-based selling, is the other side of that equation, which, and you touched on it earlier, which is listening.
Yeah.
Listening skills need to be developed and are way, way underdeveloped with a lot of people. 4 days out of 5 with myself. And it really gets down to a very teachable opportunity, and that's what I call the listening paradigm. I didn't phrase it, I just stole it. In that the listening paradigm is 1200 to 200. So you say, what's that mean? Our minds can work at 1200 words per minute. We can already be thinking 5 things down the road over the next 60 seconds. And we can speak at 200 words a minute. So when we're asking those questions of the customer or the prospect or the employee So how was last quarter's performance? What else can we do? What do you think we should do? And what else? It's just the way we're wired. We could already be thinking about, so I wonder where we're going to dinner tonight. I wonder if the weekend plans are in place. I wonder if something else is going on. And all the time, this person's pouring out this wonderful gift of their knowledge and what they think about things and what we should be learning from them and what we should be responsive to. And our mind's working at 1,200 words a minute and they're speaking at 200 words a minute. So, you've got, if somebody walks away with a lot of things we've talked about today, Rick, if they go home tonight or they sit in their office tomorrow and go, today I'm going to realize that I got a 1,200 versus 200 problem I've got to solve. And I got to make a dedicated effort to put my phone away when I'm in meetings, take notes when people are talking to me because it just slows you down. Ask follow-up questions, paraphrase things back to people so they know they heard you. That's a responsibility as a listener that's pretty broad and pretty important that
Yep.
not a lot of people think about when they talk about asking questions and question-based leadership and question-based selling. Is if all this great information you're getting, you don't realize you got to slow yourself down to absorb it. You'll think, hey, I checked the box. I asked all these great questions. I don't have a lot to show for it, though. Wonder why. So I hope that helps.
Well, it does, and um, with your reference of the taking the notes, asking clarifying follow-up questions, validating that what you heard is what they meant, that also creates a combination of trust, and it builds a partnership kind of conversation that you can't get without going through those steps. And the other thing, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. While you were talking about preparing the questions, I'm guessing you also were researching to the best of your ability the person and the organization you're going to be in so that your questions really fit. Is that one of the skills?
It's very much a skill and it's not intuitive. It's just hard work and being prepared. In my old life, my current life, if you're going to go see Walmart, you better go walk a few Walmart stores and see what their product is, what the stores look like, how it's priced. You just don't go unprepared. And that's one of the places where you're going to build your questions up from. You're going to look at the financials. You're going to look at their quarterly reports if they're a publicly held company. You're going to go to LinkedIn and find out what this person's background is, if they've been other places, if they've had other responsibilities. So you can, not to be manipulative, it's a sign of respect and a sign of seriousness and professionalism that you prepared to be there, to be succinct and be concise in what you asked, because people's time is very precious and you don't want to disrespect it by going in unprepared.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people, I think they don't go far enough because they want to be able to bring the buyer something the buyer didn't know before they were there. But many times questions are what you actually use to bring people something they hadn't thought about and that they weren't even aware they should be thinking about until you ask.
No, you're spot on with that. It's the questions are the lead to the being able to bring them something that they weren't thinking of later on. You might be able to ask them a question and have a solution on the spot, but it's more thoughtful to say, okay, here's what I heard you say. This is what you said your challenges are. Here's the competitor that's keeping you up at night, whatever the case may be. I'm going to come back and solve these 3 problems for you. And then you ask for the follow-up appointment. And then when you get back in, it really boils selling down to checking boxes. Right? You go back in for the follow-up and you said, hey, Rick, when we were together last time, you said these were the 3 things that were important to you. This is the 3 things you're measured on, how you're bonused, how you get promoted within your organization, and the 3 things that you're struggling with right now. And I told you I was going to solve all those things. Yep, that's right, Coleman. Has anything changed? Is there a 4th one? Nope, those are still the same 3. Good. Let me show you how I can solve those problems for you. And you can't do that. You can't do that in a 30-second conversation. You say, hey, give me 2 weeks to go get these solved for you. And then you go back and you get with finance, you get with ops if there's a delivery issue or
Yes,
there's a
yes,
timing
yes.
issue. And you say, here's the solutions to these meet or exceed your expectations.
Yep.
It's, they don't always lead to yes, but they always lead to you want to, if you can't win, and I built a couple businesses this way. You want to be the number two guy because the number one person is going to do something silly and they're going to pick up the phone and call you. And I've
Or they're
seen it
or they're going to
firsthand.
go to another company and they're going to remember I should have bought from him the last time.
Yeah, yeah.
So now you got me thinking about a couple of things. One, our world continues to surprise us with new technologies and new problems and so on and so forth. What, as you look at how you deal with your sales team and how you prepare them today in a Zoom world, in a pandemic world, in a whatever else is going on today, how do you train them different today than you would have 5 years ago?
I don't think it's changed in all candor, Rick. We haven't done any in-depth training in the Zoom age. Uh, I've traveled less, but it still gets down to human interaction. Maybe it's you and I head and shoulder shots, but eventually we're going to meet, or we have met. And then there's some personal engagement, but we had a good starting point from these conversations and these, this professionalism that's developed through getting to know each other on a couple Zoom calls and then in face to face, that it's still interaction, it's still preparation, it's still the tenets of what I believe good salespeople are. They ask good questions, they prepare, they over prepare. And the one I hadn't mentioned before is they've got a phenomenally high sense of urgency for follow up and follow through. That differentiates dang near any salesperson I've ever worked with. I get the email. It used to be you got the letter 2 days after the call thanking them for it. And then after a fact, you used to get a FedEx package the next day from somebody that said, hey, thank you for your time. Now you get an email. But you get that email 10 minutes after the call summarizing the meeting, or you get it a day and a half later. The good
Yeah.
ones get it 10 minutes after the meeting, and they already, before they got off the Zoom call, they already booked the next appointment. So those skills transcend, and that need for that professionalism in the sales organization transcends whether it's desktop work or it's face-to-face work. There's still work to be done in the field. There's still store visits to be made. There's still end users to talk to, even if you're in a B2B versus a B2C world. And I hadn't really thought about it, but I'm not doing anything different than I did pre-COVID, more people working remotely than they used to type of thing.
Yeah, it's more about the principles don't change. You may have new options for how you do those things, whether you send the FedEx envelope or you send the email, but
Yeah.
it's the curiosity, it's the follow-up, it's the urgency, it's those things and it's the taking the time to do the homework up front. Those things haven't changed. They may go faster because I don't have to fly to see you. I can actually see you on Zoom, but the principles don't change.
Yeah. Eventually I will see you, right? Eventually we'll see, and it's probably going to be more meaningful and more productive versus just a cold call or an introductory call face to face. It's going to be much more meaningful and much more strategic when you're face to face with that person.
Yep. So again, you and I could talk for hours and hours and hours. What's your advice for young people today coming into the market? How should they prepare themselves
Sure.
for a sales opportunity?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a little bit broader context, Rick, if I may. As you know, I do some work on the mentoring program down at Arizona State University here in town. And the one thing that I've tried to be consistent in the mentoring, and it's not just a sales, it's part of the W.P. Carey School of Business on their one of their master's programs on entrepreneurship. It gets back to some of the same tenets of good salesmanship, but at the same time, it's good business sense. Is have a high sense of urgency, stay curious, understand the value of building your network. The network today might be 10 people deep. Next year, it's going to be 20 people deep. Just don't put them in a file and forget them. Pick up the phone and give them a call. Meet them for a cup of coffee. Have a Zoom call with them, especially if they're people you really like, right? I mean, building a network isn't again, I've used the word in a couple other contexts, isn't a manipulative thing. It's like, what's in it for me tomorrow?
Right.
No, what can I add value for that person and what can they add value for me? And we have mutual alignment and respect on a whole lot of different things. But build your network. Don't take it for granted. The other thing I share from a business standpoint is that's aspect of out of the performance organization of continuous learning. I would share with you that that's one of the biggest things that's been a benefit to me is I'm learning an awful lot from these master students. They're talking about building programs and software and apps and chat GPT. And I'm like, I gotta look this stuff up while I'm in class or right after class to keep up with them. And there's some dynamic young folks out there that are coming up and coming out of the business schools that are keeping me on my toes and I'm trying to keep current with them. I will ask a question halfway through class on more than a few occasions. Can you just explain to me what you just were talking about and what that acronym was? But again, it's just don't stop learning. Hey, it's great you're getting your master's, but for heaven's sakes, this is you still got 40 years of continuous learning to do and embrace it. Don't look at it as a millstone. Look at it as a challenge and an opportunity. Have some fun with it and give something back over time as well. So those are the things that I believe are important. Those are the things that I've shared candidly, with the students I've been able to have a one-on-one mentoring relationship with, and I share with my own son and daughter.
So similar question, but give us your suggestions to senior leaders who are trying to build the kind of organization you'd like to be part of.
Mm-hmm. I think a few things would be decide what culture you want to have for your organization. Understand your responsibility in that. Make the choice. Make that decision. It's a conscious decision. It doesn't just happen by itself. If you want to go the route of a performance organization, a revenue culture organization, putting people first, there's a lot of information out there to help you do that. PTI is a great place to start under the continuous learning and development side. You didn't ask me for a plug for the company, but it makes sense to me. Wake up tomorrow and understand the 1,200, 2,000, 1,200, 200 word listening dilemma. Understand what that is and make a conscious decision to go out and ask next time you're in a meeting and you're the decision maker and everybody's looking at you, go around the table and ask them what they think. Get their feedback and then ask them the gold standard question. And what else? And listen to it. And maybe it'll influence the decision. Maybe it'll help support the decision. Those would be some of the first things I would recommend. If there's an interest in learning more about a servant leadership, there's a wonderful book by James C. Hunter called The Servant. I've given it out to dozens of people in my career, fellow colleagues, fellow folks on leadership teams that I work with. And it's a parable and it's excellent. And I've read it probably 7 times. And about a third of the way through it, every time I go, oh my gosh, I've forgotten so much of this. Why aren't I doing this every day? It's just a good, put you between the white lines, real easy weekend read. those are some things that depending, but again, the choice is the leadership's choice on what kind of organization. Do I have high turnover? It's just a fact of life. I'm going to accept it. Well, then you're probably not going to make that decision to change the culture. But if it's like, hey, I don't like where we're going, what can we do about it? I can submit this is a darn good path to go, but it doesn't get done in 30 or 60 or 90 days either.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's one of the things I talk to people about all the time is culture is not accidental. And often it starts with your purpose. And if your purpose is to build a collaborative organization, then you got to share what the purpose is because people typically don't collaborate unless they're unified. If they have really totally divergent opinions, they're not likely to collaborate very well. And so, to the best of your ability, get people on your team who believe in what your team's doing. And there appear to be two options. And one is that part of your purpose is to make the world a better place. I think all the things you've been talking about today absolutely end up with the world as a better place. And the other one, which is completely legitimate, I'm in the mercenary business and I'm going to make as much money as I can in the shortest period of time. And then I'm taking my chips and I'm going home. And some of that is fine if we have a hurricane go through someplace in Florida and nobody's got roofs. You can bring a mercenary group of roofers in, cover those roofs up, collect the money from the insurance company, and go play golf again. And they'll be glad you were there. But you're not building a long-term partnership. You're not creating a relationship with a customer. You're just fulfilling an incredible fulfillment need at the moment. And you can do either one, but I think yours is much more fun.
You know, it does bring up one thing that I'm extremely proud of is almost to the organization. And I've been recruited away, I've gone to other places. The strategies and I believe the culture and the business that we built together never wavered after one or two people. I left or someone else left or a couple of folks on the leadership team. It's very sustainable. And, you know, the fact that these companies continue to thrive, I'm really proud that I was there for part of it, or my fingerprints were on some parts of it along the way.
So last question. What
Okay.
would you like to tell us that you haven't had a chance to tell us yet?
I think I'm all done, Rick. I think we are. Is there a part of what you and I had talked about pre-conversation that I have a blind spot to here towards the end of our conversation?
I was sure you were going to say just exactly what you said, because you know you are true to what you do, and you had shared it with us beautifully. So
Well, this was a lot of fun. I can't believe we've been talking for close to an hour. I very much enjoyed this. Thank you for this opportunity.
well, thank you for being here, and maybe we'll do this again. I don't think we've exhausted all the things we could talk about, but
For
this was
today, we have. Yeah, we'll get together for a cup of coffee and come up with the next round of topics and things. I'm happy to do that.
well. I want to thank Coleman for being here, and I want to thank everybody for watching. And we'll be back with another one in 2 more weeks. So thank you.